Hi guys, welcome to the Grapplers Academy. We're back today with another episode leading on from when we talked about systems. We're going to be talking about Kata today and how you can implement that into your training.
Yeah, so we sort of cover our own experiences on this and trying to give our own definition of katas, trying to break down the sort of preconceived idea of what katas are when a roadie sort of they came into martial arts, and how you can sort of bring this sequence of moves and elevate your game to another level.
We also talk about how it can be useful for advanced players all the way through to beginners and how you can start to use the techniques that you know and apply that creativity on the mat.
Yeah, I think my first sort of conscious introduction to katas was I think it was that tumble dry one that I've played with quite a bit. Like, I think having that identified to me as a kata, it sort of made me look back on my own game and be like, okay, so now that I see this pattern and sort of see the sequence of moves, I have more katas in my arsenal now that I've realised what one actually is. And it was just like a simple sequence that I got introduced to at ASW by Darren. Where it was like a turtle to a back take, they escape, you come up to a shoulder ride, they try to turn into you, they can't, and then they turn away, then you go back to the back take, and then they escape again. And he just sort of called it the tumble dryer, because it feels like you're just sort of being span around and around and around. And then it's just sort of, this purpose of that kata was to tire them down, and then eventually there's a window for a submission to come in there. And then I think I sort of brought it back and sort of, me and you had a little play with it, didn't we, for a little bit, and sort of started introducing that kind of system into like rolling cup, really.
Yeah, so it's kind of a bit of a follow-on or that next step from what we were talking about in terms of systems in general, isn't it? Where it's like an A to B to C to D, and then you've got an option to explore depending on what movement your opponent's giving you, and you're developing your reactions from that. So, like anybody who doesn't know what a kata is necessarily just off the name, they might more think about it like they've seen in more traditional martial arts, like karate or taekwondo and sports like this usually have katas that are ordinarily done without a partner. So it's just more like a form flow sequence of movements, more like a choreographed dance routine almost, using techniques is probably the best way to describe it. Oftentimes, like, they get criticised for not being altogether too realistic, or maybe the way that they've been interpreted over time and just kind of perform for the sake of doing it is like not overly realistic and look a little bit silly almost. I can kind of say that because I spent 10 years doing these, from being a kid to growing up. I was doing karate myself. So, but they're great for instilling muscle memory and practicing technique. So that's why I think they're really useful for grappling as well, but just flipping your mentality on like what is a kata for a traditional martial art to doing it with grappling. It just takes a bit of a switch of mindset, doesn't it? And maybe you don't even realize necessarily at first that you're doing katas, because it feels more like a flow, and it's like you always find yourself doing a wrestler's ride to back take, and then they end up escaping your choke, and then you end up coming up to a chin strap or something like this, and you just do that same thing over and over again. Well, actually, that's probably a kata, and that's something that you could drill as a sequence, like you're talking about, isn't it? So, think about the stuff that you're doing in the gym, and then think, do I use that back attack, and then am I going for an arm bar, and then they're escaping, and it's a triangle, or whatever it could be. You've probably got your own katas that you're already doing without thinking about it. So that's how people can start expanding their own, isn't it?
Yeah, I think like a couple of basic ones, like you said, that people probably be able to familiarize themselves with would be something like knee cut to sort of side control, and then say your partner sort of turns away mid-pass and goes to turtle, and then they invert, end up back in an open guard, then you go back to the knee cut towards side control, they turtle, then they invert again back to close guard, like to open guard. That's a form of a kata. Or even like I used to do this as a warm-up, starting butterfly sweep to mount, your opponent hip escapes and goes back to their butterfly guard, they do the sweep to mount, then you escape to your butterfly guard, and just sort of that going back and forth. That's still a form of kata. And a lot of people, they might just be like, oh no, that's just a chain of movements. And they're not wrong in that answer either, because like you said, it's just a flow of systemized movements that sort of chain together and create, like reverting back to the last episode, a system or a sequence.
Yeah, absolutely.
So everyone got the shots ready as well.
Shots, yeah. I've oftentimes taught like this as well. Like I'll teach like this at Flow, or if I've ever contributed to a lesson down at 12 gauge, it'll be along the lines of this for the whole session, where we'll kind of run a sequence but break it down bit by bit. So maybe it starts with a takedown, or maybe we're already down and it's like a pass, then to a positional hold, and then maybe onto a submission on the end from there. So it can be just something 3 or 4 movements long, but it's a good way to practice as well, isn't it? So like if you're doing the takedown as the first bit of the drill, and then you're adding on a pass, let's say to side control or something like that, for example, by the time you've done 40 minutes of this, 30, 40 minutes of learning this, you've probably done 100 takedowns, 50 passes, and then 25 finishes. And it's just a good way of building up muscle memory that's active as well, rather than just being the static drill. Yeah. And I think that helps me, definitely. And I see it help other people as well when they're learning to solidify where does a takedown go? Why am I doing a takedown? And actually, how does that turn into a submission? It just makes that pathway a lot clearer, doesn't it? It's like, oh, I'm going to do the double leg so that I can get to here. And then that's going to lead me to the submission. And sometimes you just see it on people's head and like, yeah, just like a mind blown sort of thing. They finally connected all the pieces, because sometimes I've had some jiu-jitsu lessons, or some people come to me and they've said that they've had lessons where it's just been like, oh, we just learned armbar today. And I don't know how to get to an armbar, and I don't actually know what the practical purposes of that are. So like I know an armbar and I can't do anything with it because I'm never in that situation.
No, definitely. I think like you probably might have heard this question yourself as well. It's sort of when you sort of show a pass or you show a transition to the next position, and you always get well, what's next? It's like, well, this is a technique for today. It's like, well, yeah, but where do I go from here? And it's my usual answer is, well, there's always multiple pathways of where you can go, and if you turn up next week, you'll find the answer to your question. But yeah, like sometimes it is nice to teach that sequence of movements so they can sort of see A to B to C to D to finish. But like, what I don't want people to sort of miss sort of get wrong here as well is that learning the individual techniques and the individual sort of positional stuff is just as important as learning the sequences. Because like, if you can't really have a chain that involves, or kata that involves, and like going through side control, if you don't know how to control side control, because like you might drill the kata where it's, you go straight from the pass to the side to mount to back to finish. But in live, you might end up spending 30 to 40 seconds in side control because that person's actively defending and trying to stop you from getting there. So it's a tough one to sort of say which one to learn first. I'm swaying more towards learning the techniques first and then putting it into a kata. But then in the same light, I can see the flip side of that where, okay, you want to show this beginner where things can go and where it sort of can end up. So yeah, I'm a big fan of teaching both ways. I think I kind of sway from either to either. But I think, especially in advanced class, I think it's important to sort of learn those katas and sequences more as you progress in your career mainly.
Yeah, definitely, I agree. I mean, I'll kind of back up on what I was saying there before as well. So like when I've maybe contributed to a class down at 12 gauge, it's usually to more advanced guys. There might be a couple of newer guys in the class, and like you'll kind of see what you were talking about there, not an over familiarity with the positions and it just doesn't flow as well. So like 100% agree that you should learn the basics in each position first, or the basics of the move, before trying to stick it into a full kata. Sometimes what I've played around with and experimented with teaching as well, with complete beginners, is like learning the sequences to a kata over the space of 4 or 5 weeks, and then we worked the guard pass on week 1, and you know, 2 weeks, and you've had the experience doing that, and over the course of the weeks you've built up the individual elements towards this kata. You've got a kata there to get you from A to B, from stand up to a finish. But it's definitely a lot easier to do in a more advanced class, because everybody should already know the basics of the moves that you're going to show. And that's not to necessarily say that they might even take that kata as a whole for themselves. They might even just take one aspect of it, and introduce it into their own kata or their own style.
No, definitely. I think that's where sort of I call that the sort of the beauty of the sport. Whereas nobody's going to have the exact same arsenal. They'll have similar arsenals, but they'll have very similar sort of toolkits, and they'll put the piece of the puzzle together very differently from maybe their peers, or even their coach. They'll have, like, say, a handful of moves which are pretty much the staple and the sort of exactly the same as the coach. And then they'll have offshoots where it's sort of like, well, I've seen this and I felt that this works better for me this way, so I'm going to add this into my game. But it might not be how their coach plays, but it still fits their sort of their own style. And I think once you get beyond maybe your 2-year mark of training, I think it's important to start to research and develop your own sort of style in your game, as well as sort of what's being taught at the academy you're at. Because I'm the first to say it, like, the coach at your club doesn't have all the answers, and that's where we're fortunate enough now to be in a day and age where you have got the internet and you can go and sort of research different styles and techniques. And when you see a sequence of moves that you like in a match, you can break them moves down individually and then add them into your own katas and develop your own style and your own sort of, again, system to then develop like a different arrangement of katas that's going to help you further your grappling game.
Yeah, it's important as well, isn't it? Like, to resource different learning tools. And I think jiu-jitsu is a funny one, isn't it? Because it's kind of like a 5,000-piece jigsaw puzzle that can be put together 10,000 different ways and still be the way that it's supposed to be. Boxing, kickboxing, awesome sports, kind of a lot more limited in terms of techniques that are available. A jab's a jab. You can throw it a couple of different ways across a hook. You start introducing kicks, Thai boxing, kickboxing, whatever. There's still a pretty limited amount of techniques. So your creativity is kind of limited around, let's say, 10, 15 techniques, maybe something like that. Jiu-jitsu, it's infinite, isn't it? Because you can, just one technique, let's say, for example, there's 15 different ways that you could pull it off. And as you quite rightly said, the likelihood is that your coach might be able to show you 10 of those, but actually that's not part of their style. And I think forming a style, it's interesting when you go to different gyms or you train with people from different gyms and they've got a different style, or the club as a whole's got a bit of a style, because it kind of takes more than one person to form a habit that eventually actually ends up turning into a style, and you end up developing katas off the back of, because one person could have a particular way that they want to play, but if the whole rest of their gym and the training partners are kind of shutting that down or playing it a different way, they're never going to get the opportunity to get it off. And actually they might never develop a style that they're looking for. But if there's a group of them, or like a solid core of people in the club that are doing that sort of style that's maybe a bit different from what the coach is doing, that's when you can start to develop a bit of differences and a few different subtleties in the broader game.
Yeah, definitely. Like, sort of, I think that's where you see the different sort of styles and sort of sequences popping up in different gyms and the different styles, is when you have pockets of different training partners that will train together and develop their sort of style together. but then there'll still be that core base within the club where, okay, they've got great guard passing and great top pressure, but these guys over here have got great guard as well. And it's almost, they've had to develop that to counteract what their training partners are doing as well. And your sort of katas and the way you play will kind of almost reflect that.
Yeah, some days you're the hammer and some days you're the nail. And oftentimes in the gym, you get the people that are the nail just a lot. So they'll develop a lot better bottom game, let's say, for example. And their katas are going to be a lot different just because they're not necessarily presented with the opportunity in live rolling to be the hammer. And like, it's why a lot of people say, and the common phrase is that you should learn jiu-jitsu from a small guy, because they're going to have a lot more experience and a wider arsenal of techniques that are available to them that a big guy or a larger coach might only be more experienced in, like being the hammer all the time and not have developed the dexterity for escapes, or, you know, do you know what I'm trying to explain on that? It's, maybe you can elaborate a bit more on it. I'm getting a bit tongue-tied on that one. I'm not going to get this one out as eloquently as I want to.
Yeah, no, it's sort of like, I get what you mean. Like, it's kind of like how we were talking with, we had Violet and Lorna on recently, where like the female training partners tend to be the smaller ones, and the smaller training partners in the gym you kind of almost have to be that bit more technical with what you're doing, so that you can almost out technique the athleticism, especially at the start of the journey. The more athletic person's going to win. When it's white belt versus white belt, more often than not, the more athletic players going to win, just because of their lack of understanding of what's going on. But then as you develop, you're going to have to develop that technical side of things. And because of the size difference, the smaller player will develop a greater understanding of the technical aspect of training, because they've not been able to rely on brute strength, extra weight and things like that to kind of compensate for their lack of technical knowledge. Not to say that the big guys aren't technical, it's just the bigger, more athletic ones kind of get away with being less technical to start off with. But yeah, no, completely. I think having that greater understanding translates very well when someone's going to coach as well. Because I certainly know that at the start of my coaching journey, I had to take a step back from things that I was doing, because I was sort of realizing that, oh, actually, my strength kind of helped me with this technique and carry it over. And I had to really break down the body mechanics and the angles of things to help the smaller players at my club.
Yeah, all your smaller members or players at your club are like, this isn't working. I don't know why it's not working. And you're just like, well, you just do this, and they're like, I can't bicep curl 80 kilos. Like,
I just really can't escape arm bars. Just bend your elbow and pull your fist towards your face. Like, that's how you escape them, innit?
Yeah. No, spot on. Like, that's exactly what I was trying to put. The smaller people, because they've not got the option just to brute strength the way through everything, it's got to be done perfectly, which means technique's got to be perfect, isn't it? Yeah, totally, absolutely. You got it out for me. That's what I wanted to say that I couldn't say. Maybe I needed a cup of coffee before we started recording this. But like, what, you know, people might think a cat is like a strict drum. If you what would be your advice to your students or people asking you, or the guys listening, in terms of like how they should actually implement it into the weekly training, and how a kata should work as drilling, warm-ups, live rolling katas? How does that pan out for the week in your mind?
So for me, I guess it would depend on the player and their experience. So I like using katas in a flow roll sense if I'm warming up. So if I'm with somebody and we're doing like a light roll to warm up, I will try and work through my katas, whether they're escape ones, offensive ones, catch and release for submission ones. I will work through sort of my either developing ones or my sort of library ones that are about 50% of where they're up to.
Yeah.
And with ones that I'm trying to learn like as new, I will more save them for drilling rounds. So yeah, I'll either save them for my own personal drilling, whether that's at an open mat or ad-libbing at the end or at the start of the technique being shown. So for example, say I'm at class and Cam's showing here's how to get to mount from side control, for example. I may sort of add in a guard past the side control to start that off with, or add a continuation of where I'd go at the end of the mount take, whether that's going to a head and arm choke, setting up an arm bar, taking it back or whatever. And if I'm trying to learn a brand new kata, I like to see how it feels in rolling first. So if I feel like, okay, there's a pathway there, let's just have a rough attempt at going around these routes, so then I can come back, plan it out in my head, then go and drill it, then try it in flow rolling, then put it into rolling. Because it's only the ones that I'm sort of 60 to 70% confident with where I'll actually push to be landed in rolling. Because I know how my opponent's going to react. I know where they're going to move. I know where I can rest if it's been a tough round. And I know where the end position is going to be. What about yourself?
Yeah, I agree with that. And rather than just kind of going over the same points, I'll add on with what we talked about a couple of weeks back about using all your training partners in the gym. For those ones that you're learning or that you're trying to piece together, either these usually when you go with your main training partners or like the people who you'd have a tough round with or you're going to get beat with, might not be a good idea to start practicing the katas on them, because they're going to see your pathways and then get their muscle memory on it and get their timing down, and you're never going to get a chance to get it off on them because they're just too quick on figuring out what you're trying to do. So those ones that you're learning definitely should be better off done either like you just agree that this is a kata round or a flow round or whatever it is, and you're both kind of playing around with it and there's not a lot of resistance there, or you do it with the lower belts or the less experienced people than you who aren't going to be quite as sharp with it, aren't necessarily going to see the escapes or whatever. And it also again ties in with the principle that we both adhere to of that catch and release as well. So it can just turn it into a more flowing kata with that catch and release on the subs, and you can just chain the whole thing together then. And then once you've fine-tuned it on the less experienced guys, and like you say, you've got it to like 70% certainty or whatever, now you go and take it against your main training partners, like put it on them a bit and actually see where the cracks are. And then you start to water seal that and then pressure test it, and basically, you can make the smaller adjustments because you've already made the big adjustments on the less experienced people and basically taken out the big chunks of it that are going to be a problem. And also just practicing your muscle memory as well. I don't know about you, but I often find that if I've made the mistake in the past of trying to learn a new technique in live rounds with one of my main training partners, and then it just doesn't work, and I'm like, oh, it doesn't work this, I'm leaving it. But actually what I needed to do is save it for them for maybe a couple of weeks and then bring it on in when I'd refined it a bit more. I'm sure you've had the same experience with that.
Yeah, like I've done exactly that same thing. Like I've commonly speak about this in Hive I did that with triangles. Like did triangles, trying them for a week, told myself my legs were way too short for them, and I didn't go back to them for like over 5 years. And then revisited it, had a few adjustments, and I was like, okay, so maybe they do work and my legs aren't too short. And yeah, it's one of them ones where, yeah, like you said, using the training partners, using the relevant training partners for the correct stage of your learning process. But I also, like, going back to what you're saying about like the sort of flow rolling that you're doing with your partners and sort of style of rolling. Another great one that you can use to practice with this is like an adapted form of flow rolling that, like we've done it before when we've sort of trained together, where it's one person is a reactive body. So they're defending and giving you live feedback in how you're moving around. And the other person is offensively like rolling. So they're looking for catch and release submissions. They're looking for dominant positions, their transitions. And you're essentially trying to find your way to as many submissions and finishing positions as you possibly can during that sort of offensive round. And then you'll switch over at the end of that round and your partner will get the same type of rolling. And you're just going to give each other the right amount of feedback and the right amount of moving to then sort of get the good amount of work done.
Yeah, totally. So I'll just like throw in my advice as well for, because we've just spoken about more experienced or intermediate players there. For beginners or people in that kind of first bit of the journey, like maybe just spend more time focusing on the techniques that you're learning in class and trying to apply the techniques that your coaches are giving you. Like, of course, ask questions as well. But your coach is giving you all the pieces of the puzzle that you're going to need to long-term start developing your katas. So don't try and add too much creativity to it to start off with until you've got a better understanding of all the techniques and the way that they're going to work. And also don't try and add in any of that stuff that you're seeing on YouTube or maybe on Instagram, because you might not have the finesse on it because you've not been shown the finer details on it. Sometimes like you can see something on somebody else doing the technique and actually the touch and the sensitivity of learning it and being showed that from a coach and a training partner is actually the more important thing of it rather than the mechanics that you can see on Instagram or YouTube.
Oh, definitely. I think another thing that a lot of people forget as well is a lot of jiu-jitsu is the feel side of it as well. So having that aspect of coaching there as well is you don't know how a technique feels or how it's supposed to feel unless you've been on the receiving end of it. So having that extra detail with your coach will help.
Yeah, definitely. Like anything else you'd say for complete beginners on that? Like I was basically just saying, like, listen to your coach and follow what they're doing. I think one thing that I just add in addition to that is the better you get at the technical aspect of it and the better you are actually executing techniques over time, that's when your creativity can start to open up. Because everybody's creative. Yeah, like some people are more creative than others, but actually you have to have a really solid base and fundamental foundation of techniques and technical perfection first before actually that creativity can come into play.
Oh, definitely. 100% agree with that. And I think the creativity that you get, it doesn't tend to come until you're more comfortable with the sport. So if you find that you're not getting as creative as your training partner, so to speak, don't let that sort of dishearten you to start off with. Sort of let the fundamentals and the foundations be built for the sport before you then get into that, try to force that creative side. So yeah, don't get disheartened if you're sort of trying to create something new and a new sequence of moves, but you've not quite got that creative aspect to you yet. Like, it takes time. And until you've got the foundations and the fundamentals solid, you're not going to fully understand how to create a full sequence. Hi guys, thank you for watching or listening to the latest episode of the Grapplers Academy. If there's any subjects that you're really wanting us to sort of cover or might help your game, don't forget, please reach out to us.
And don't forget, if you liked anything that you saw today and think that it'll be useful for anybody else, share the videos around. Make sure that you get as many people looking at this as you can. Go to the socials, like and subscribe to everything, because we'll be putting up more content weekly for you guys to see.